Well, good morning, everybody. I charged my battery, and I figured out that it's having a 20-minute limit of recording each time. So I will try to keep an eye on the time myself, and then make various little clips in the hope to upload at a certain stage. After managing all the other aspects of the technology. Today we are having the workshop lecture of the course EU Finance and Development, and I would like to discuss three topics today. One is a last glance at poverty, at the topic, what problem do we solve? Two, I would like to spend time on the recipe, the order of measures I call the Finance and Development recipe. And thirdly, we will discuss the sources of law. Let me see whether the slides are... So I promised to look at the article of Dayton, and one of the things he discussed first was something he called participatory rural assessment. The question now and on the exam would be, what do we mean with participatory rural assessment? Not feeling well? So who, in the context of this workshop lecture, could I give the floor on this concept? Yes.
Well, participatory rural assessment is typically the representatives of different non-governmental organizations or different researchers which are working in that particular field will go to local villages in an area that is finding difficult to development, and they would ask the villagers, they would together with the villagers and ask them what they think, what do they believe to be a common problem of theirs. They would map the area, they would discuss the issues that they're faced with. Also, they will talk about the employment in the area and the overall economic and local development. And as well as that, they would be asked whether they consider themselves to be poor and what do they understand by the word poor and the word poverty. And basically with that, they can, with the information that they gather, they can define what poverty means in the eyes of the locals. And in this way, with the rural assessment, actually the people themselves will define whether they would be considered as poor or not. And it wouldn't be based on the national poverty line. It wouldn't be based on the national threshold, which is actually based on different criteria. It will be based on something else. And then depending on what the locals get as feedback from these researchers or the representatives of the non-governmental organizations, they would allocate the people who are willing to come, the countries that are willing to invest in the area. They would come up with a particular sum of money that they would be willing to invest in the local area or in the village or in the region. And basically this fund would be allocated to these people who consider themselves to be poor. But this is something that can be actually abused, because if people see that a lot of funds presumably would be given to a particular area, they could intentionally find themselves as being poor in order to get the money that would be allocated.
We come
to
to
the area.
that problem as the next topic.
And
So,
also, I missed another point. Maybe.
yeah, hold on. Before we have to capitalize on your earlier points. So, compared to the definition of poverty by gross domestic product, what is this assessment for a method based on this beautiful contribution. We have an optimistic, happy person on the first row. So what would be your statement on that? Are you really sorry? Okay. Maybe you can do something with that. So here we talk about a method to assess poverty. And in this stage, I would like you to contrast it with the mathematical approach to divide the gross domestic product by the amount of citizens. So what's the difference of this method? Yes, please. Yes. Speak loud. Yes. Yes, so both are measuring poverty. Yeah? So if you divide the total amount of money, let's put it that way, wealth in a country by citizens and then divide it through 365 days, then you have this $1.25 threshold of poverty. So that's one method. You can do it in an office in Washington. And then my question is, how is this method different? Yes?
Well, the first one, as she explained, is based on the participation of the citizens or the local people, whereas the other one, the one using GDP, is also based on, let's say, the external body.
Okay. And so this method, participatory, so I invite you also to mobilize your logic, because the word participatory means to participate. Rural, so not metropolitan but rural assessment. So the method to ask the people in the field, what do you think? Are you poor? In which context? To eventually intervene, to mobilize development projects in all kinds of shapes and nature. Okay, that's step one. And one of the key things is that people do not regard themselves poor if they are active in the field in terms of work, and that in those communities people are regarded poor that are not able to work, those who are ill at home or who are old, too old to work, that they are regarded poor in the eyes of the rest of the community. So that is assessment of poverty by the ability, your subjective perception of your ability to participate in the work and economic life, and not connected to the amount of money you have on your bank account, because there are no bank accounts in most rural areas. So that is a dramatically different approach. And if that is an approach, and if There's a reality for the people in the field. And then you can immediately think of tools to combat poverty by having or by stimulating people to start working, because apparently that helps them to perceive themselves not as poor, especially back. So if one of the problems is that women are not allowed to work and consequently are perceived as poor because they are dependent and not independent, what could then be a solution to such a subjective situation in an area? Sir, in the middle. Yes, and how could you encourage them to work? If the problem is that they're prohibited from working? So you're the Minister of Justice of the country, role play? Exactly, getting rid of rules. And so we are in the changing rules business, or making rules business. So you can create rules or abolish rules. This sounds silly. It's not. It's the essence of your profession. So if there are obstacles, like in the internal market in the EU, if there are obstacles of legal nature for the free movement of goods, services and capital and persons, remove the obstacles. And so that's step one. And the context nicely presented of these investigations are that those who investigate have a lot of money to spend, an obligation to spend that on development, because that's sort of the world desire to spend that money. And then we run into the problem that people understand that if they regard themselves as poor, that will result in development aid. So the problem of asking people, are you poor, is that they might not say the sort of original perspective they have, but a orchestrated perspective to arrange it in such a way that funds are lent. And then you have to realize that it's not the elderly women in the field that start lying, but the village head who coordinates the investigators in their interviews, and he says, my village is very poor, because he knows that if a development project starts, I'm talking about a caricature, with those caricatures you can get a sort of sensitivity. With such a project, the head of the village could put half of the money in his own pocket. And so that is what agendas, individual interests do with people, and that blurs the picture on a micro level of the definition of poor. And so just to indicate. Yes, Finger.
But on the other side, like for example, considering the example of women, it's very important to make a participatory assessment, because not all women that in a particular anthropology context are considered to be poor. They perceive themselves as poor. So basically maybe they are glad in their particular system, and if you go there and change the rules, probably the entire society changes. So that's why the participatory assessment is important.
Yes. And so there's this important aspect of the subjective perspective, the self-reflection, and that brings in quite a few other disciplines, among others anthropology, where you try to assess these feelings of happiness or unhappiness and the label poor. And that is, let's say, one of the deepest concerns and problems of what we talk about. What we try to do in this course is to park that for later study. First we need to understand what the current mechanisms are also. Okay, I mentioned already the other approaches, like sort of calorie counting approach in which you could calculate the food people eat and so forth. And then the Mikaber problem. Who could help me in explaining to me what the Mikaber problem is? Yes?
Yeah, well, if you make a really clear distinction of, or a clear line, who is below or who is above the poverty line, maybe the change is not so big within the people who are just above or below the line. So how can you make an distinction between a person who's just above it and does not deserve the aid, or then a person who's below it?
Yes. And who can share with the class where this funny name comes from? Yes?
Well, I think it was a person who coined the term.
No, so quite often this is named after a sort of scholar or a person or politician, but this is based on a character in a piece of literature. Yes, in the back. Charles Dickens. Explain the little story or his line.
Dickens' father was a fictional character from the Charles Dickens novel David Copperfield.
David Copperfield. Indeed.
He was modeled on Dickens' father, John Dickens, who, like the father, incarcerated in Debtors' prison.
Yes.
Taken to his creditors' command.
And does your source also reveal the Mikaber problem line? It's in the Dayton article.
The problem line.
Okay, we park that one for a little break in a while. Then we move to the last topic. That is the distribution of income. So, on the basis of a GDP, a country can be rich, but the wealth / income can be distributed in a very uneven way. There's recent scholarly work on that topic by Mr. Piketty, who basically says that that's a world problem, but their political thoughts differ widely between those who think that if there's a distribution problem, we have to redistribute, let's say socialist approach, and those who fiercely oppose that, with good reasons, that says, well, the moment we start to redistribute income and wealth, then no one will be willing to generate wealth anymore, and then we go down together, and sort of more liberal approach. So the income problem is one, but will be tackled with this mobilizing domestic resources we see in the next topic. So I'm not stating here that the distribution as such is something that can easily be solved, because there's no proof for one or the other system that is better. Emotionally, we all think of, whoa, that would be nice to distribute it more equally. And many tax systems, and Ms. Mosquera will talk about that in more detail, have the function of redistributing income. And so all the taxes you pay in the income tax and profit tax is given to the government, and the government gives all kinds of subsidies and services to their citizens, so redistributing the income. And that is also a big issue in the development thinking. And obviously, when you look at the communities that are, let's say, most urgently in need of development, and we look at all those communities in those countries that are more in the poor region rather than the few oil sheiks that also living in the same country. And they're not, let's say, the target of development. Then the Human Development Index tries to combine these various measure methods to a useful sort of calculation and giving points to countries. And one of the things they did was to look at what are the sort of goods and services you sort of need to not only survive but have a sort of meaningful life. Food, clothing, housing, health, education, and that is sort of a sort of choice. What do we want to look at? And I invite you to look at the Human Development Index. And then, last but not least, we have the exchange rate issue, that worldwide development projects are calculated in dollars, but dollars compared to other currencies on the globe have a different value, and that should be taken into account. And that leads to the other abbreviation on the previous slide, PPP, purchase power parity. And the sort of Human Development Index is the sort of most comprehensive attempt to bring all those different perspectives into one measure stick. So in development projects, the Human Development Index is taken as the most guiding measure stick to help the organizations that deal with development, finance and development, to help choose them which project to pick up and which not. Because obviously there are much more projects out there than, let's say, the finance and development industry can cope with. So it is about making choices, and the Human Development Index could be seen as sort of the result of the scholarly activities, of which Mr. Dayton is one representative, to get the head around the definition, well, what do we mean when we talk about poor? With those various sort of aspects of the story. So that's on the poverty. Let's move